Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. Welcome to episode 275 of the podcast for February 8th, 2017. My guest today is Katie Anderson, following up on her last appearance in episode 233. You can find that by going to leanblog.org/233. When we talked in October 2015, she was living in Japan full-time, taking a deep dive into the culture and learning a lot about Lean and Toyota. So she's been back home in California for a while now and shares some of her more recent reflections on her time there, what she learned, and what she continued to learn. At the end of the episode, Katie talks about a giveaway that she's running over on her website. She's giving away a Daruma, which is a Japanese doll that has two blank eyes. You fill in one of the eyes. When you then set a goal or an intention, you fill in the other eye when you achieve it. So that's kind of a cool thing to get. She's also giving away a copy of my book, Lean Hospitals. And even if you visit her website and you don't win that giveaway, you'll still be able to get a copy of Katie's top 10 lessons from her mentor, Mr. Yoshino, about lean thinking and leadership. So you can go to www.kbjanderson.com/mark to learn more and to enter. You can also find a link to that at leanblog.org/275. Katie's also running a workshop in March before the annual LEI Lean Transformation Summit, a workshop titled Coaching for Development, Structured Coaching Using A3 Thinking. So I hope you'll go online, check that out. I hope you enjoy the discussion we have here, again, with Katie Anderson. Katie, hi. Thanks for coming back, being a guest again on the podcast.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to talk to you again.
So, maybe people listening heard the first episode when you were a guest. It was episode 233 from just over a year ago, but maybe if people haven't heard that, can you sort of recap a little bit about your professional background and how it was that you ended up with the opportunity to live in Japan?
Yeah, great. And actually, the first podcast we did, I was sitting in my office in our apartment in Tokyo, and now I'm back in California. So I've got to traverse the world and come back. So I'm based in California and have been a lean coach and consultant for over 10 years now, primarily in healthcare. Was working as an internal lean leader for two different healthcare organizations before we moved to Japan, and then had started my own consulting practice based on lean coaching and consulting. I also I teach some courses for Catalysis, which was formerly the Theta Care Center for Healthcare Value, and now I'm teaching with the Lean Enterprise Institute as well. And how we got to go to Japan was for my husband's job. It was just almost 2 years ago exactly. So right after the new year in 2015, we moved to Japan. We'd known about it for about 6 months before, and I was really excited from a professional standpoint as well as a personal one, because what greater opportunity to go and learn lean from the source and more deeply enrich myself from professional learning. And when I was out in Japan, we knew it was about 18 months that we'd be there, and it was pretty spot on accurate. We were there for exactly 18 months. I went out and I learned a lot and connected with many people and went out to many different organizations and used that opportunity not only for personal learning, but also started writing my blog and sharing that learning with other people.
Yeah. And so, you've been back a little bit now. I mean, in the first podcast, you shared some of what you were experiencing, the visits, the networking, what you were doing. Now that you've been back for a little while and had some time to reflect, what are some of the first kind of additional reflections that come to mind?
So we've been back about 6 months now, and I'd say the reflections I have are they're not different from what I had after the first 6 months. They're just more deeply enriched from having more experiences. The last 6 months that we were living in Japan, I had accelerated opportunities for going out to go see and connecting with people. And so the experiences I have just confirmed some of the initial experiences and observations I was making around not only Japanese culture, but around what we consider lean thinking and practice in the Western world. I just wrote an article for the Planet Lean, based on some of those reactions and experiences that I had.
Yeah.
And for me, it was one of the biggest takeaways, and maybe it was assumptions that I and many other people have about Japan being much more lean thinking and in totality than it actually is. Lean culture or lean thinking is not the same as Japanese culture and Japanese thinking. Although there are some things that are common and make the Toyota production system probably easier. There are many cultural traits or human traits in Japan that actually seem to run counter to what we might consider lean thinking. I thought that was very interesting as a lean practitioner.
Yeah, so let's kind of delve into that a little bit. And I'll link to the article for people to go to the webpage for the episode that I announced in the introduction. The article's titled, "If You Think Lean is Inherently Japanese, Think Again." Cultural traits that support lean. What are some of the things that make it, I guess, if you will, easier, even if it's never easy or never perfectly... it's not the default in Japanese organizations, right? No,
I think, and a quote that really stood out for me when I went to the Toyota Kyushu plant down on the island of Kyushu was something, don't remember exactly what it said, but that the people at the Toyota plant were still having a hard time, with the new processes that Ono was putting in place. So, change was hard for them too, and it shows too. It wasn't like everything was lean practice or TPS there as well. But some cultural traits that it seems like probably support lean thinking and practice are a few that I called out in the article. And one is the concept of kata in everyday life. So routines and practice of the way you do things there are kata for everything in Japan, from exchanging your business cards to how a sumo match is conducted, to who sits where at a business meeting or in a taxi, and the deep level of apprenticeship to learn the kata, the craftsmanship culture that exists out there. And I think some of those traits or practices in the culture perhaps lend themselves to following standard work and being more open and receptive to having these standards and kata that they practice in a work environment as well. So that was one thing. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think, and if I remember right from some of our chats outside of podcasts, had you just fairly recently seen the movie Jiro Dreams of Sushi?
Yes, I'd seen it actually right before we moved to Japan, we watched it. But I saw it again. I had the opportunity to go out to Japan just a few months ago for a wedding from some friends of ours, actually a Shinto wedding, which was a fabulous experience. And you, I think, had posted that you just rewatched the movie, and so I decided to download it for my journey as well. And it was really interesting to see it again now through having different context and experience of having lived in Japan.
Yeah, because when you talked a minute ago about these traits of kata, routine, striving for perfection, that's the story of the movie and of Jiro and his work and commitment and his restaurant, right?
It's amazing. And you think of the older son, he is still the apprentice. Now that is probably too long, but you think of that same practice of people learning and spending many, many years under a sensei, and having to break things down into small little steps, learn how to do it and how to be able to really be on their own as a sushi maker, a sushi chef, or as a leader. And that's what I think Toyota had an interesting. What they've been able to do is take something that might be a more limiting cultural trait, which is a real reliance on hierarchy and people looking at, up at the leader for give me the answers, and sort of not abdicating some of the thinking around what to do, just looking at the leader for all the answers. And they've really changed that and brought in the apprenticeship model about how can the leader be a coach and teacher for the people working with them and below them, and sort of use the hierarchy in a positive way.
And so what are some of the other traits that make it easier, I guess, in Japan?
Well, one of the, certainly not all of Japan is 5S by any means, and we can talk about that in a little bit, but there's a real cultural preference for cleanliness and order. I have never been to a cleaner city than Tokyo. It's amazing. Everything runs on time. Everything's very clean. And children are taught this, it's almost a kata at school where they spend 20 to 30 minutes at the end of every day cleaning their classrooms, cleaning the bathrooms, learning the rigor and the routine of what it means to clean and participate in keeping their community clean. And I think that also goes into just the same traits that we talked about before, like a real commitment to whatever they're doing and learning that. And then there's also some, just experiences around listening and patience. I think the Japanese have a much greater, they're just more comfortable with long pauses and silence in conversation. And as an American, and especially an extroverted American, this is definitely, the pauses in conversation would make me anxious. But it was also a good opportunity. I realized how much I wanted to just jump in and sort of fill the space with my own talking. And learning to sit in silence has been something that I've been working on for a few years now to be a more effective coach and leader personally. And it was just a good reminder, too, about being okay to sit in silence, and that's okay, and not to just jump in and start talking.
So I will jump in and start talking instead of leaving you in uncomfortable
That's fine.
silence.
Thank you. That would be a little
as
fun for our listeners.
As a podcast host or a webinar moderator, there's always a balance. If you want to be listening to what your guest is saying, but you also do sort of have to think about what you're going to say or ask next.
For sure.
I don't know if I'm always good at that. If there is a long, awkward pause, I edit those out. Let's talk about some of the flip side. Maybe some of the ways that the Toyota production system lean is not always just naturally occurring in Japanese businesses. What are some of the cultural traits that make it a challenge and make it less than perfectly easy to embrace this? Or what are some of the reasons why organizations, even Toyota, would struggle with elements of this approach?
One of the things I already touched on was the sense of a hierarchy and a command and control leadership. Sort of typical Japanese businesses are not lean thinking, and people look to the leader to have the answer and sort of it's almost follow whatever is happening or the leader says. What really is, I think, is tied strongly to this or the limiting traits are this fear of failure and rigidly following rules. So failure is not seen as okay. You want to be perfect. You want to have what's outwardly projected to be perfect. And so people are less willing to take risks. And this is cited many times when I went to conferences or other events where people are talking about how can Japan as a whole become more innovative across the board, and how more startups can flourish in Japan. And it goes back to a lot of this fear of failure and not wanting to take risks. And tied to that, too, is also following the rules, what was laid out, not necessarily thinking outside the box, this is how we're supposed to do things, and not challenging the status quo that, we've always done it this way, so we should just keep doing it that same way. I saw a few organizations who really maybe, when you go and see them, they're not exhibiting all aspects of lean practice. Maybe you really need to work on their 5S or their flow, but we're really trying to harness people's or have some countermeasures against these traits of fear of failure and following the rules. And I think I talked about this one organization I went to in the last podcast, but this organization that makes widgets for electricians. Their company motto is the only rule is no rules. They do this because I really want people to think outside of the box and not feel constrained by what they feel like they're supposed to do. And they've captured, tremendous market share and actually have really been driving innovation to create value for their customers.
Well, it's right. It's just on that topic. I mean, I'm reminded the first time I went to Japan with Kaizen Institute, one of the people who was there sort of assisting and as a guide was relatively young engineer. He might have been about 30. He had worked at Honda for a number of years, and he compared Honda and Toyota as much as you can generalize. He said, Toyota hired people with better grades than Honda did, and the people working at Honda, he used the word, were a little bit naughty. And what he meant was, I think, people who were a little bit more willing to take risks and not necessarily just always try to fit in. And that was just a good reminder that you can't generalize about quote unquote Japanese companies, even those in the auto industry that might share a lot of the same shop floor practices, might have a different type of organizational culture that they're trying to build.
Absolutely. And if you're wanting to go see quote unquote lean in action in Japan, there isn't a term lean. It's not really, that's a Western construct. And so you go out to different organizations who are practicing different elements of what we might consider TPS, having originated from the Toyota production system, or some things that they've developed themselves. But it isn't this whole focus on let's go lean like it is here in the Western world. Something else I thought was really, and I've been reflecting on lately, is that when Taiichi Ohno and other Toyota leaders were starting to bring in what is now known as the Toyota production system and the Toyota way, they were really just dealing with the human traits, and they could be cultural traits or just specific human traits that they saw in front of them that were barriers to innovation and to problem-solving thinking. That was their current condition to improve. But, these same principles around TPS are really the best of the Western management thinking and Japanese management thinking combined. And we all have different limiting cultural and human traits that we need to overcome in service of delivering better value to our customers or in healthcare to our patients. And so it's not necessarily Japan that's perfect on this, or the Western world, things that are challenging for Japanese may be more easy for, say, someone in the US, and vice versa.
I want to kind of go back a little bit where you were talking about innovation, fear of failure. Mm-hmm. Did you get any exposure or talk to anybody in Japan involved in startups or anybody there embracing or learning about the lean startup methodology for Eric Ries, where they talk about the idea of fail early, fail often, that you fail your way in three different cycles and learning, of course, fail and learn and iterate and eventually get there, as opposed to having a perfect solution. Did you? I wonder how that would play in Japan within the startup scene.
So I wasn't as connected to the startup scene, although I did go to a conference on biotech startups last year. There wasn't a focus on, say, the lean startup per se, but there was discussion around how do we get around some of these cultural barriers? How do we create an ecosystem here in Japan that's more conducive to failing and trying and learning? So not using sort of the terms that we might be more familiar with here, but still talking about the same concepts. And I'm sure that there are more startups who are really trying to do that. And I see the Japanese culture is starting to shift and change as it's gotten more international and more there are more startups happening, and just the international thinking culture. And so I imagine some of these things that we both that embrace about Japan, but also some of the things that have been more limiting for them in terms of innovation or success, they're going to start shifting.
So let's talk a little bit also about there's different cultural aspects of lean. Organizations in the U.S. And I think in other countries have been talking more about the the dual pillars of the Toyota way, not just continuous improvement, but respect for people. What does that mean to be more respectful? Can you talk about what you learned or saw or talked to people about in Japan in regards to the idea of respect? Is that where does that fall in terms of generalizing about Japanese organizations and what that means for lean?
That's a great question, Mark. And I've been reflecting on a lot of these organizations that I went to who, on part of a, quote unquote lean study tour or trip, where some of the production principles you might not be seeing, but what was universal across all of them was the pillar of respect for people. And how do you engage people in problem solving? How do you develop people? And not just employees, but how do you deliver good for the community? And I feel like this emphasis really on people development and creating a culture of respect where it means everyone is supported and engaged and not constrained is one that we don't necessarily see as much focus on in the U.S. or potentially other countries as well. We've gone more towards the tools side of the Toyota production system, and I think we'd be better served to really get back to that second pillar too, of like really understanding more deeply for us what does respect and teamwork mean, and how do we really engage people and not have it feel like it's something being done to them.
Yeah, and so let's talk a little bit more about community. 'Cause, if you go to the Toyota plant in San Antonio, in their visitor center, they know people come not just to see how trucks are built, but they're there to learn about the Toyota production system and lean. And so in their visitor center, as they're explaining and illustrating these different concepts and terminology, there's a section about respect for people. I'm trying to remember if they use the term respect for people or respect for humanity, because you hear both phrases. But the one thing that stands out though is they emphasize that it doesn't just mean respect for employees, and I think a lot of times that's the conversation that I hear in healthcare in the U.S. And yeah, that's a part of it. Yeah. But Toyota talks about respect for the environment, respect for the community, respect for suppliers, and they have little displays, talking about what that means, including working toward becoming a zero landfill facility. So I think there's, at least as illustrated in San Antonio, a broader definition of respect toward all people, I guess.
I would say that I experienced the same thing in organizations I went to in Japan. Of course, Toyota for sure, but these other even smaller organizations out in the communities that they're really talking about, we want to be there to respect our employees and getting them engaged. We also want to provide them with employment, and in that way we're creating a better community. We also want to be good for the environment, and how do we improve our processes so whether we're contributing for a better environment, how do we give small things that might add joy, or that we might consider customer service for the employees and their families, create parks around our company, or have places where the families can come. So there's this real sense of connecting with people, the community, and doing good. Kaizen comes from the meanings change and then for the better. Mm-hmm. And they don't see that just as processes, but sort of change for the better for really all of humanity, as you said.
Yeah, and that's that's a really high-minded goal. I mean, there's, you're in California. I don't know, have you seen the show Silicon Valley?
Yes.
From HBO, and this cliche of all these startups saying our mission is to make the world a better place, and it seemed like most of them probably don't mean that, and they couldn't possibly accomplish that. But there's sort of this expectation that at least you have to say it. But I think it's interesting. Toyota talks about their role in society. And they seem to take that very seriously. In San Antonio, that means providing and protecting jobs. It means working toward technologies that are better for the environment. I think it's admirable, and I think a lot of companies get caught up in saying, "Oh, that's irrelevant. Yeah, that sounds nice," and we check the box and have a corporate responsibility statement, but we're really out to maximize shareholder value. Is what it really comes down to. And I think Toyota shows you can have both. They've obviously been very successful in so many financial measures.
Well, and if you think about Toyota in Japan, there's in Toyota City, and so many people are connected to Toyota, and this is a lot of these companies are out in rural areas, just like Toyota City is as well, and so many people who are involved in the organization are also in the community as well, and so I think there's this deeper connection to community and to place. I also heard a lot. This word was brought up many times at several different organizations, but the concept of revitalization. And we practice these principles to revitalize our industry, to revitalize our community, which was also meant bringing in jobs and money back to the community. We're here to revitalize our people's spirits, potentially if they were out of work or they were doing mundane jobs previously. They want to create this positive energy, and it wasn't just in rural areas I heard this word applied, but in a Tokyo ward office, like a government office. We're here to revitalize people, and I thought it was a really interesting concept because I never had heard the word revitalize in relation to lean practices in the U.S.
Well, I think that's a great word, and there's so much opportunity and the need. I mean, I think of healthcare organizations where morale has really suffered. I did a podcast with Paul Deschamps and Diane Shannon about burnout among physicians, and that's not just a problem with doctors. There is a lot of need for workplace revitalization to engage people and start creating some positive vibes, for lack of a better way of saying it, when people feel just kind of beaten down. Trying to turn that can be difficult. I think that's where Kaizen and getting people participating in small improvements, trying to create an environment where they feel safe to speak up, that can start that process. Right.
And it gets, that concept of revitalization is linked so tightly with respect for people and respect for humanity.
So you mentioned, communities and place. So we were going to talk about one particular community that you had a chance to visit after our podcast before you left Japan. Tell us about, and I found it hard to believe, there's a place called, or labels itself, the 5S City. Tell us about that.
So I heard about this. It's a town called Ashikaga, and it's about an hour northwest, I think, of Tokyo. And I'd heard about it within the first 6 months of arriving in Japan, and I really wanted to go visit. And a colleague of mine who has connections there offered to co-lead a trip there with me, and I was so excited. We went in May. And the town does do every other year a 5S summit, which they just had last month, which I unfortunately was not able to go. But if anyone's able to go in 2 years from now, it will probably be very interesting, and I'm hoping to get there myself. But this is a town called Ashikaga, and they really use the concept of 5S for revitalization. A few prominent organizations, probably, I think it was about 15 years ago, were they were using 5S principles in their own organizations and saw tremendous success with how it engaged people in doing the work and making improvements. And side note, my observation is it's not just 5S that they're talking about. They're really talking about Kaizen, but driving with the 5S principles, but using people to engage their creativity and problem solving across the organizations. So they came together with the town leadership and developed what they call the 5S school as a way to teach other organizations, initially within the town, how to implement 5S. And then now they've expanded that to teach other organizations across the country. And I guess if you're international as well and can speak Japanese, to come to their 5S school as well. And I think now about over 150, 160 organizations, government, schools, manufacturing groups all practice 5S. But this is 5S beyond, when, you initially think, oh, 5S, like, let's, make sure everything's organized and straight and clean. We have a process for maintaining it. They also bring this concept of joy into the work. And I was really blown away by discussion we had about 5S is there to engage people. Managers just bring forward the concept. People, then staff and employees are supposed to use their creativity to make their workplace more organized and more joyful.
As opposed to being stifling as clumsy 5S initiatives, unfortunately, can be. It's the opposite of what you were just saying.
And so I was really fascinated by that concept. We went to a organization called Ogura Metal, and I'm in the process of finally writing a blog post about that visit. I'm very behind on many of these Gemba visits that I had. And we talked to the COO, who was this wonderful woman, Mrs. Ogura, who's the daughter of the founder. And she walked us through the plant, and you'd be surprised. You usually think 5S is just, it's going to be, as you said, sort of boring, and it's just like, let's put everything away. But they took it to another level. Yes, everything was organized, and they had a process, and they had an amazing Kanban system in place, and they actually have what they consider the Agora production system. So they went way beyond just 5S. But they brought in concepts of bringing in color, bringing in fun to the workplace. They had different titles for areas, like they called the fruit stand was one works area with the workstations were all decorated like fruit stands, and the employees did this to make their factory work more interesting. The shipping area had a food store theme, so like flat things were called pizza, iron plates were called steaks. And they had big pictures of, pizza and steaks above, and then a description as well of what things are. So just a way that the employees felt, just had a little more fun with the environment, but still going along with the original principles. And I loved that because it wasn't something I've really seen to that degree before.
Well, it reminds me of, talking with, learning from Pascal Dennis, who worked for Toyota up in Ontario, Canada. And he always emphasizes, when he talks about Kaizen spirit, he uses the word playfulness. There's an important place for that. This is where, at least, my impression of, a couple of short trips to Japan, as much as you can generalize, Japanese culture, Japanese people are at the same time very incredibly serious, but yet then playful or goofy. I don't mean that sounds disrespectful, but like kind of like a fun. There's kind of this dual nature that's fascinating.
Yes. Well, I find most of Japan has this dual nature across everything in life. So but no, that's true, and I loved how they really harnessed that creativity and that playfulness to create joy in a work environment. And they said the staff were way more engaged, and they actually saw improvements in productivity and also turnaround times or I guess lead times for delivery, because people were so engaged, and I loved it.
Yeah. Well, and a couple of minutes ago, you talked about the idea the label 5S sometimes means more than 5S, and that reminds me, just pulled up here, there was a book called Clinical 5S for Healthcare. It was written by Akio Takehara. I was asked to write a foreword for the book, and the reason I did so was that even this book, the title says 5S. It's written by a Japanese man from Tokyo, but the book really, it's about lean. So like in a way, I wish they hadn't called it Clinical 5S. I mean, it was good that, as you were saying, it's not just about organization, but how 5S leads to better quality and better patient safety. So it's fine. If the term lean isn't always used in Japan, it seems like if people are talking about 5S, you have to be careful and make sure you don't think, oh, okay, yeah, they're just putting tape around everything. It seems like sometimes that's actually the description they'll use. If it's not Toyota something or other, they'll use the term 5S.
Right, and again, we come with our own cultural and language assumptions about what things mean. And I found that to be true in the organizations. 5S was the anchor point for what we consider lean thinking, with this additional spirit of joy.
Yeah. We're also going to, have a chance to talk here before we wrap up, in terms of relationships and networking, the opportunity you had to develop a relationship with a mentor who also, I guess, back in the day and probably still today, was a mentor to John Shook. If you can kind of tell the listeners that story and about that opportunity that you've had.
Absolutely. One of the greatest joys, and it felt like a bit like serendipity, was to make the acquaintance and now friendship with Mr. Isao Yoshino. We had just found out that we were moving to Japan. It was, I guess, 2.5 years ago, and I was at the Lean Coaching Summit. And Mr. Yoshino, who was John Shook's first manager in Toyota City when John joined Toyota as the first foreign employee in Japan, he was at the conference, and I mentioned I was going to Japan. He gave me his business card and said, "Look me up when you arrive." And I thought to myself, absolutely, I'm going to be doing that. And he offered to take me to Toyota City and show me around. And it was in April a year and a half ago that I went for the first time. But that was the first of maybe 8 or 9 visits that I had with Mr. Yoshino, spending the whole day together, going out and doing a variety of things. And he's actually come out to California and visited me, and he's going to come out again, he's coming out for the Lean Summit in March, so he's going to come visit again.
This is the Lean Enterprise Institute Summit?
Yes. So it was just spending time with this 40-year Toyota veteran and leader. I just learned so much in talking with him, and a great honor to me is he says he learns so much by talking with me too. So that in just the exchange and dialogue that we have, so that's a real honor for me. We have fun together, and we've gone out to some Gemba sites together, not just Toyota. I invited him to go to Toyota Memorial Hospital with me, and he served as my interpreter. And it was very interesting for him to go to a healthcare organization, having been in manufacturing. And she just has words of wisdom, and which I've written about extensively. Always have my notepad open with me, and I'm just like writing things down. Obviously speaks fluent English, he spent about 11 years of his career in the U.S.
What were some of the things he saw or asked about or pointed out there at the hospital, being an outsider to that environment?
He asked more questions and was, he was just interested in learning how the Toyota way and the Toyota production system principles were being translated. He was particularly also interested in how they were deploying Hoshin Kanri, because that was a big emphasis of his time and a lot of what he lectures on now. Mm-hmm. One of the bad things is they got so excited about talking about Hoshin Kanri that he stopped translating, and they had a big conversation just in Japanese for like a half an hour. And and then I got like the 2-minute summary. So there's a lot of enthusiasm, and what's nice is he's now made a collegial relationship with the colleague who I was introduced to at Toyota Memorial, and they've spent some time together and for follow up. And another blog post I need to still write is we met with Mr. Samiya again, and he talked more about the Einlon Kaizen system, the electronic Kaizen system he developed. And I know you have much interest in that, Mark. So I will let you know when I finally get around to writing about that.
Yeah, well, and I encourage. I always read Katie's blog post. I encourage people to go check out the blog, and you've written about the 5S City, and I'll link to some of these posts. But kbjanderson.com.
Yes.
Really, you mentioned earlier in the podcast. Was it a year or 2 years ago? When did you start blogging?
I started blogging. I started writing shortly the day we moved there, but I didn't have a blogging platform, so I started posting around maybe 22 months ago. So it's been a while now, and I'm enjoying still writing, even though I'm not living in Japan.
Yeah, well, you've done a great job with the blog, and I encourage everyone, if you haven't already, to go and check that out. I look forward to these additional posts about Mr. Yoshino and the other reflections and the stuff that's in your backlog to write.
Yes, about. Thank you.
I think we're all guilty of that, right?
Yes. Well, I had to make a decision point in the last sort of 3 months that we were living in Japan. Did I not have experiences so that I could stay home and write about my previous experiences, or go out and have the experiences and write about them when I had a chance later? So I chose the latter, but I now have a backlog, but it'll get there. I also wanted to offer something special for your readers, which was a chance to, and we talked about this before, to enter a giveaway for a Daruma, as well as a copy of Mark's latest book, Lean Healthcare. And a Daruma is a Japanese figure shaped as a little head, and it has 2 blank eyes, and you fill in one of the eyes when you set a goal or an intention, and then when you achieve your goal, you fill in the other eye. And they're all over Japan, and I brought hundreds back with me, and I have a few of the medium-sized ones that I would like to give away as to a lucky winner of the podcast listener. So you can go to you can go to my website, and there'll be a page there which Mark will link to.
Yeah, you said that was going to be kbjanderson.com/Mark.
Yes.
Yeah. The Daruma doll reminds me. I'm going to just point people not just to your website, and thank you for doing that giveaway. 6 years ago, podcast episode 103, I talked with Matthew May. He had a book out at the time called The Shibumi Strategy, and the cover of the book has a Daruma, and that's a big part of the story. This idea of setting a goal, you fill in that first eye, and how do you work your way toward accomplishing that goal? A good way to start 2017, I guess.
Yes, for sure. I'm a big fan of Matt May's, and I did not know about that book, so I'm going to have with the cover, so I'm going to have to look that up.
Yes.
And also forgot to mention, on that same page that you can get a copy of, or a one-pager. I pulled out some of my top 10 lessons from Mr. Yoshino about lean thinking and practice and leadership, so you can get that there too.
Yeah, so everybody who goes to that webpage will get that download, and they'll have an opportunity to win the Daruma and a copy of Lean Hospitals. And due to shipping costs, just to remind folks, that'd be limited to U.S. listeners. I know we have a lot of global listeners, but you can go to the website and read Katie's blog and get the download. That's not limited by physical space and shipping. Yes,
great. What better way to ring in the new year? A copy of Mark's book, and a way to set your own goals and intentions for the new year.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that offer, Katie, and thank you for coming back on the podcast. It's always great talking to you, and thank you for sharing some of your reflections and stories and insights here with us today.
Thanks, Mark. You've been a real supporter of me and my blogging, and I appreciate all your comments and feedback, and look forward to hearing from your listeners as well.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Take care.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.